from Fox 17 News.
Well, one man is in custody for what Grand Rapids police are calling a brutal attack on the city's west side.
This happened around 6 a.m. in the area of Hamilton and Richmond. Police say a man and woman had several injuries after being assaulted. We want to go live now to Kalamazoo, where we're hearing from the county prosecutor about the death of Cornelius Frederick. Let's listen in.
I want to thank all of you for being here today. We're going to talk about Cornelius Frederick and charges that have now been authorized arising out of his death. Before we get into that, I want to thank the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety. Immediately beginning April 29th after this incident and Cornelius' subsequent death on May 1st, the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety began an investigation, a very thorough investigation into this incident. I also want to thank the state of Michigan, both the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, as well as the licensing divisions at the state of Michigan for their investigations into this case. Those investigations were completed at the end of last week and subsequently turned over to my office. And lastly, I also want to thank the Office of the Attorney General. Attorney General Nessel's office was very helpful in facilitating communications between my office and the state so that we were kept up to date on the status of their investigations, when we would likely see them completed, so that we could move forward with our review of all of the information necessary to make a determination regarding charges. Lastly, I'd like to thank Governor Whitmer. The governor's office and her leadership in this case has been extraordinarily helpful in making sure that these investigations were completed, were done thoroughly, and that action is being taken at the state level in order to help us to make sure that something like this never happens again. That it ever happened is a tragedy of, beyond description, and we certainly don't want to allow for another young man to have his life taken from him in this way. So on April 29th, Cornelius Frederick was a resident at Lakeside Academy here in Kalamazoo. As a result of actions that took place there by staff, he received severe injury, which caused his subsequent death on May 1st. My office has reviewed the entirety of the investigation by the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety as well as state agencies in order to make a determination as to charges in this case. We felt it was necessary to prioritize this case in a way that is seldom done. I've had 3 assistant prosecuting attorneys reviewing thousands of pages of information, watching DVDs, reviewing all of the materials possible, some doing the exact same thing, sometimes doing compartmentalizing some of the work that's been done by various agencies so that we could move forward as quickly as possible with charges against those most responsible for Mr. Frederick's death. We've been in contact with Cornelius's family through his attorney, Mr. Marco. I understand that Mr. Feiger's office has now become involved in the civil litigation as well. There was a press release that he sent out earlier today. We continue to have discussions with them to be able to provide them with the information that they need in order to understand what's happening in the criminal investigation, what's happening in the criminal case. They've been very helpful, very cooperative with our office, as has Mr. Marco, their initial attorney or one of their attorneys, in speaking with us about this case. With regard to those persons, and I'll name them in a minute and list the charges that have been charged, you should all be aware that we've contacted their attorneys. Their attorneys are aware that charges have been authorized. Arrangements will be made through their offices in order to facilitate the defendants turning themselves in so that the criminal justice process can begin with their arraignments in the near future. We've authorized charges in this case against 3 separate individuals. These are the persons that we feel are most closely responsible for Cornelius's death. Each one of these complaints contains multiple charges in it. So I'm going to read off to you their names and the charges and maximum consequence or penalties that can be imposed in this case. As all of you, I think, understand, in a criminal case, we're limited ethically and legally about what we can say about the case. So the information that I can give you regarding details of what happened is limited, but if you have questions after we hear the charges, I'll do my best to answer them as I can. First, we've authorized charges against Michael Joshua Mosley of Battle Creek, Michigan. Mr. Mosley has been charged with homicide, manslaughter, involuntary. It's alleged that he did cause the death of Cornelius Frederick by committing the following act or acts in a grossly negligent manner: restraint of Lakeside resident Cornelius Frederick contrary to statute. That offense, manslaughter, is a felony punishable by a maximum of up to 15 years in prison. Mr. Mosley has also been charged with second-degree child abuse. It's alleged that he knowingly or intentionally committed an act likely to cause serious physical or mental harm to a child by lying across the chest or abdomen of Cornelius Frederick during a restraint. That offense is a felony punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Lastly, Mr. Mosley has been charged in count 3 with child abuse second degree, child care organization violation causing death. It's alleged in that count that he as a person did intentionally violate MCL 722.112, a section of the Child Care Organization Act, being MCL 722.11, by laying across the chest or abdomen of Cornelius Frederick during a restraint, and that violation of statute caused the death of Cornelius Frederick. That offense, again, is a felony punishable by a maximum of 10 years in prison. We have also charged in Mr. Frederick's death Zachary Raul Solis of Lansing, Michigan. The charges against Mr. Solis are the same as those against Mr. Mosley. In count 1, Mr. Solis is charged with homicide, manslaughter, involuntary for causing the death of Cornelius Frederick by acting in a grossly negligent manner in his restraint. That offense is a felony punishable by a maximum of 15 years in prison. Mr. Solis is also charged in count 2 with second-degree child abuse, a felony punishable by 10 years in prison. And in count 3, Mr. Solis is charged with the child abuse second-degree child care organization violation causing death, a felony punishable by a maximum of 10 years in prison. Lastly, we have charged Heather Newton McLogan of Kalamazoo, Michigan, with 2 offenses arising out of her actions on April 29th. It is alleged in count 1 that she committed the offense of homicide, manslaughter, involuntary. The language in this charges against Ms. McLogan is slightly different because of her alleged role in causing the death of Mr. Frederick. Ms. McLogan is alleged to have caused the death of Cornelius Frederick by the grossly negligent failure to perform the following legal duty: by failing to timely seek, obtain, or follow through with medical care for Cornelius Frederick. That offense is a felony punishable by a maximum of 15 years in prison. It's alleged in count 2 that Ms. McLogan committed the offense of child abuse second degree, child care organization, violation causing death. Specifically, it's alleged that she did, being a person, intentionally violate MCL 722.112, a section of the Child Care Organization Act, being MCL 722.111, except by failing to timely assess Cornelius Frederick's condition or to seek, obtain, or follow through with medical care, and that violation causing the death of Cornelius Frederick. Again, that offense is punishable by a maximum of up to 10 years in prison. The criminal process in this case will begin with these three defendants being arrested and brought before the court, whether it's by physical arrest or by turning themselves in, being brought before the court for an arraignment, where they will be told by the court what those charges are that they are facing, what the maximum punishment is, and then future court dates beginning with a probable cause conference or pre-exam conference will be scheduled. We don't have any future court dates at this time. We felt that it was important because of the attention rightfully being paid to this case to inform the media as soon as charges had been authorized, so that everyone would know that appropriate action was being taken to seek accountability for Mr. Frederick's death. With that, I'll allow some questions here if you have them.
What position do those three people hold at Lakeside Academy?
Each of those persons are staff members at Lakeside Academy. With regard to the specific positions, I'm not going to get into that, other than they are all employees who were there during the restraint and subsequent to the restraint and prior to any contact with emergency persons.
Are they currently employees, or were they?
They were employees. I believe that Lakeside has taken action against those persons involved, but what action they've taken is not relevant to our determination of charges, nor am I in a position to say what action they took.
Was the investigation that KDPS did at all different from what you saw from the state?
Yes and no, right? There's a lot of overlap in terms of the information that they received from other residents in the case, and from, you know, a medical perspective, there's a great deal of overlap. There's also a different focus by each of the agencies involved in investigating this. The Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, CPS division, is looking at whether or not an action of abuse took place, which is different than KDPS's did a crime take place, which is different than the licensing division, should action be taken against Lakeside and its parent organization, Sequel. So each one of the investigations has sort of a different role as part of the entirety of the picture.
I'll reiterate that then. Was there any evidence that was different? Any interviews that didn't match up or attitudes in there?
No, the investigations, I think, build on each other. They overlap. There wasn't any significant inconsistencies between the investigations.
There were a lot of people, from what we were reading in reports, that were there involved in this incident. The three people that were charged, were those three physically doing the restraint?
Two of them were physically doing the restraints. The third, Miss McLogan, wasn't physically involved in the restraints, and you can tell from the language in the charging documents that her role in this was different. There was, in addition to the three people that we've charged, several other persons that were present. We're looking at their involvement. We're looking at the investigations, and in order to make sure that we held those, in order to make sure that we brought charges against those most closely responsible for Mr. Frederick's death, we concentrated on them, these three people. With regard to other staff that was present and participated in the restraint or failure to take subsequent action during the restraint or after, we're continuing to look at those people. Further or additional charges are possible, maybe, but we wanted to, it's been 2 months, right? This took place on April 29th, and this young man died on May 1st, and we're standing here on June 24th. We needed to make sure that we assessed the case in responsibility and took action as soon as possible against those we felt were most responsible. We'll continue to look at others in the future.
Was Miss McLogan, was she like a medical staff?
All right, big update coming to us from the Kalamazoo County Prosecutor there, Jeff Getting, announcing that 3 people will be facing charges now in the death of 16-year-old Cornelius Frederick, who died back in April at Lakeside Academy. 2 men will be facing homicide, involuntary manslaughter charges, various child abuse charges, and a third, a woman, will also be facing a manslaughter charge, along with a charge for basically failing to get Cornelius medical help after this happened.
Yeah, in a timely manner. We know 2 of the people who are being charged, both of the males, are the ones who restrained him, and as Prosecutor Jeff Getting said, that third person was not involved in the restraining but in the subsequent response. And so all of them were employees at Lakeside Academy, where this happened in Kalamazoo, again, almost a month ago now, almost 2 months ago now. And so we will see what happens. The next step, as the prosecutor mentioned, would be to get them in either by arrest or by turning themselves in and get this process going. So we are going to